everyone, this is update for September 20th, 2024, day 940 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for September 19 and 18. I'm gonna start with general strategic or macroeconomic update, and then I'm gonna switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. So actually, even though it shows slide for Japan, I'm gonna mention a little bit about the US, where US Central Bank, Federal Reserve, cut interest rates by 0.5%, bringing them to below 5%. So it's going to be between 4.75 to 5%. This was a quite significant rate cut. And I would say that the head of U.S. Central Bank was pretty transparent. It's all driven by the weakness in the labor market in the U.S. And in some ways, U.S. Central Bank acted preemptively in attempt to prevent mass layoffs in the U.S. And at the same time, inflation is not fully under control in the U.S. It's still about 2%, which is a typical target. That's a declared target in the U.S. and most of the West, probably with exception of Japan. I think it becomes very clear that the goal of the U.S. Central Bank is not inflation, but sustaining labor market. And the reason that's the most critical component, because U.S. labor market means there is consumption going on, and that is about 70% of U.S. economy, GDP. That sustains service economy in the U.S. And then through import of the goods, it sustains the rest of the world economy. So this is kind of like a linchpin that is the most critical part. And if it collapses, we're all going to go through pretty significant economic event bordering on depression. And so they essentially attempting to prevent it, even at the cost of not being able to control inflation. And most likely this will lead to increase in inflation, at least in the US. The opposite actually approach is being done in continental Europe, where essentially governments through their policies literally cut off pieces of economy, and that cooled down demand, and so inflation is down and things appear under control, but they are not truly under control, because it's essentially you kind of like cut your hand and saying like, okay, well, I have fewer demand for things because I have less of me, but really it's not. I think everybody can understand how absurd it is. Situation in the UK is actually more closer to US, where central bank there is also still not controlling inflation, and inflation is actually running pretty hot in the UK. The problem with this approach that's being taken mostly by the U.S. Central Bank is this increasing ongoing inflation will create problems with social problems, because people simply cannot afford the prices, because they're going faster than their income. So this goes back to what I mentioned, is that the end point is the same. It's just there are two roads. One road is deflationary, another one is inflationary. But all these roads lead to Rome, as they say. lead in the same direction. It's just how it's going to be done. That's the only question. Now I'm going to actually switch to Japan because, as I mentioned, Japan is becoming, I would say, important and probably a focal point because its business model is somewhat getting out of control, is somewhat getting destroyed. I don't think it's as bad as it is in Germany, and who knows, maybe I don't know enough about sort of internal Japanese politics, but there might be, it's possible that the Japanese ruling class will be able to figure out the situation. But so far, things are definitely probably going to get worse for Japan before they're going to get better. So there is a number for inflation that just recently came out. As you can see, inflation in August in Japan went up from the general headline number from 2.8 to 3%. That, and then also core, which is actually more important, from 2.7 to 2.8. This is a very important situation because Japan used to have chronic deflation. They couldn't get any inflation. Not to say that this is great. Inflation is never great, but this is just, let's say, this is what central banks, how they operate and how the current financial system operates. It's based on debt. It's a debt-based currency, and so that leads to inflationary outcome everywhere. As long as the system is sort of set up in that way, that's how it's going to function. But going back to Japan, so this is very high inflation for Japan that the country hasn't seen in probably since 80s. So this goes back to what I mentioned in prior videos, that this really means that the Japanese central bank cannot reduce interest rates, which they're very low. There is not much to reduce there, and potentially may need to a little bit increase those rates. And because differential between the US central bank interest rates and Japanese is becoming smaller, because US central bank is moving closer to the Japanese right now with this interest rate cuts, this really means that incentives for Japan to donor its capital or to lend its capital to the US are becoming smaller and smaller, and given there's inflation, basically Japan will not have capital to lend, and that's really the importance of what I mentioned, that the Japanese economic model seemed to be broken. I'm not saying it's for sure, but it does appear so based on these economic numbers. And if it's broken, it cannot generate value add, or it cannot generate, in other words, capital. And if it cannot generate capital, therefore it cannot lend capital to the rest of the West, and mostly to the US to finance consumption there. And so that's whole importance of Japan, because it was source of capital. Now let's move to situation in Ukraine. Just want to mention a few things. Is that it seems that Ukrainian forces are really successful at attacking Russia's ammunition depots, specifically artillery and missile depots, and it appears there's another one was destroyed in, I think, Rostov on Don region, which is actually much more important because that's a main logistical hub for Russian invasion troops in Ukraine. So this may significantly undermine Russia's military effort on the battlefield. But again, this is a temporary situation. It's not solving anything in the long run, and it's not really solving problems that Ukraine is facing on the battlefield. And as long as Ukraine is not gonna learn how to actually perform on battlefield, nothing is gonna help. and that's really the essence of the matter, and that is driven by the Ukrainian political top and then Ukrainian military top, which are completely incompetent and unfit to change, to lead basically Ukraine in this war to successful conclusion of this war, which by that I mean is territorial integrity is the outmost goal in this war. There's no question Ukraine, cannot cannot be successful in winning the war over Russia in a true meaning, winning, meaning invading and capturing the capital. The best case scenario for Ukraine is to keep its territorial integrity, and in some ways that's the only way. This is the only option for Ukraine. There's not much. There's no option B, C, or D. It simply is because if Ukraine does not maintain its territorial integrity, it will be consumed by Russia. Maybe not immediately this round, but in 3, 4, 5 years, it will be completely consumed by Russia, as I stated. Now let's start walkthrough our battlefield in a clockwise fashion. We're just gonna jump to the situation with Ukrainian invasion into Russia's Kursk region. And things here seems to be remaining more or less the same. There's a lot of contradictory information from both sides without really any independent factual verification. So I would say most likely scenario, what's going on right now, there is some stalemate between two sides with initiative being actually on the Russian side at this moment. Russia's forces attempting to attacking and attempting to squeeze Ukrainian forces from Kursk region, but it appears that they don't have enough resources yet, basically enough troops on the ground to do that successfully. And Ukrainian command attempting to counterattack. Those counterattacks so far are not successful, and by that I mean that Ukrainian troops could not get to Lushkovo and essentially cut off this Russian attacking forces. So far status quo remains, where Russian attacking forces attempting to push from the west towards east without really much success so far. This is the situation not almost, but at 11 days after start of the invasion. That's probably the area that was sort of the largest area that was captured by Ukrainian troops, and since then it's all shrinking. Now let's look at the situation northeast of Kharkiv. Things here on pause by both sides. It's not critical situation, not critical section of the front line right now for both sides, simply because there's no resources on both sides. Now let's move to the north Lugansk section of the front line, and things here I made some update, and things looking, as you can see, much worse in the northern, especially northern part of this front line. Essentially, Russian troops has cut off Ukrainian forces into two pieces. The one that's defending Kupiansk, and then the sort of part in the south that's defending essentially this whole Liman. This is the key town here, Liman area, and Borova. So I think that the key point at this, the key for Ukrainian troops at this point is to prevent Russian forces from crossing a Skill River and creating bridgehead on the western side of the Skill River. If that happens, then it's essentially this whole area around Liman is doomed. and Kupiansk also becoming under question. And eventually that really means everything that was gained by Ukrainian forces or liberated in September 2022 is going to be lost. So it's becoming kind of critical situation for Ukrainian forces not to allow Russian troops from crossing Oskil River and establishing bridgehead there. That's really the only significance of Russian troops getting closer to the Oskil River, to this whole sort of change in this configuration. So that's the meaning of this change, because otherwise Russian troops making some advances where I'm showing in this area, Raihorodka, Kovalivka, they are not sort of critical or meaningful, given the whole situation where Ukrainian forces on retreat anyways. Now let's look at the situation on the North Donbass front line. The northern part remains more or less under control. No major problems here for Ukrainian forces. The southern part, things also getting somewhat worse. So first of all, Ukrainian forces evacuated bridgehead on this on the eastern side of Freshwater Channel. So the front line is going more or less along the front, the Freshwater Channel, with some areas around Chasiv Yar, where Russian troops managed to establish bridgeheads on the western side, and apparently they are attempted to establish bridgehead also in this area, a little bit to the northeast of Grodivka. Also, Ukrainian troops are essentially losing Donetsk, so it's close to be lost. So again, things here develop in a negative direction for Ukrainian forces, as you can see. Now let's look at the situation on the central Donbass section of the front line. Things here are a little bit temporarily without sort of major Russian gains, but it's a temporary situation, and in probably week, 10 days, there will be new gains here, because the sort of Russian troops are making advances on tactical advances that will essentially lead to larger territorial gains, unfortunately. So first first of all, there is not really much going on in the area of Grodivka, Novogrodivka. The situation remains more or less the same. The southern part, the problems are that Russian troops are continuing their advance west of Ukrainsk, and specifically there are unconfirmed reports that they managed to gain control of this junction, basically this road that goes from Selidove to Tsukurina, and then there's this road from Ukraine, so this T junction. So they moving basically west, and the importance is that they moving between the towns, and essentially they engulfing Selidove and then Tsukurina, basically moving through the fields, which is always easier than assaulting a town or village like Tsukurina. So again, it shows that Russian command is becoming a little bit more intelligent, let's put it this way. There are fights going on in Ihernik, so Russian troops are fighting. There's fight going on in the town, so this really means that it will not hold that long. It doesn't seem that Ukrainian forces completely evacuated this peninsula, this semi-pocket, Nevetsky semi-pocket. They're still sort of trying to hold on to this pocket, which doesn't make any kind of sense. Then there are also reports that Russian troops advanced sort of south of so there's fight going on in Hostre, which is in process of being lost by Ukrainian forces, and even Russian troops managed to advance to the southwest of Hostre, to this where I'm showing, to this point west of it. This is also unconfirmed, but again, all of this most likely is going to be true or confirmed in a couple days. But as you can see, the front line is really crumbling in many locations. And eventually, once Russian troops will reach this Vovcha river, then this whole situation with this pocket is going to become very dangerous for Ukraine. For Ukrainian forces, they will have to withdraw, and at that point, the front line is already sort of breached between Selidove and Sukurene. So this really means that even this whole area, Hirny, Kurakhivka, Vovchenka, will have to be abandoned by Ukrainian forces. So as you can see, this is another significant loss in the making for Ukrainian forces, for Ukraine. There is another sort of part of negative news, is that Russian troops advancing around Vugledar, and they're advancing to the west of Vodyane, and they also advanced to the north of Prechystivka by basically crossing this tiny river and advancing in along this road that I'm showing from Prechystivka north somewhere to this area. Again, also not confirmed, but as you can see, this is also making Vugledar, it's squeezing Vugledar defensive positions from the flanks, and really this really means that that Russian command will capture Vugledar by essentially typical strategy of the pincers that it's trying to employ everywhere. And again, this goes back to what I said, that the Russian command is acting more and more intelligently in this war. Instead of attacking Vugledar head-on, it basically decided to capture it by creating these pincers through Prechystivka and then west of Vodyane. And they are not that far away from reaching their goals. Now let's look at the situation on the Zaporizhya front line. Things here more or less quiet. There are some probing Russia's attack without much success around the Kharkiv area. And then the last section of the front line along the Dnipro river, now it's completely quiet. It's sort of dead end like area of the front line. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.